So, Mr. Speaker, for Amendment 839, I would like to divide the amendment at Section 1.4 and 1.5 and ask for a roll call on each. I'd like to take 1.4 first.
So, Representative Creasure, you want to take the part from 1.2 to 1.4 first?
If I could, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. So the amendment is divisible. We're going to be voting on the first part of the amendment first. And there's been a roll call requested. There are 15 hands. There will be a roll call. Representative Creasure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, what I'd like to do with this amendment is to require all signatures for the solicitation materials to be printed in at least 14-point font. I'd like to avoid the fine print. Make smaller type can be hard on the eyes and even can cause headaches, according to the National Institute on Aging. We do have an example of this in statute with park closings, 327C.095. Used in the closure statements, the following language must include in a font no smaller than 14 points. So I would just like to include that for the first part here on the child care signatures. It's a good amendment, member, and I would urge your support on this one.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I rise in support of the Creasure Amendment 839. We had a debate a couple of years ago on the font that we use even on our campaign literature. We have a requirement of what size you use, and it's for the sole purpose of making sure that the citizens can read actually what is in print. As Representative Creasure pointed out, we need to make sure that we can read it and that these folks are fully aware of what they're signing on to. I think this is an excellent idea. It makes good sense, and it makes sure that we have integrity in this entire process because that's important to the people of the state. So I encourage you to vote green, please.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's should be a handout coming out, and it shows what the authorization card that is going to be used. And there's also going out what's from the BMS, what their requirements are and what their suggestions are. Setting specific typeset exceeds even the standards for election disclosure. There is simply, which is simply inconspicuous type. If you look at this thing, it's a lot larger than the 14-point type. So what you're talking about is unnecessary, and I urge the members to vote no.
Representative Creasure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Representative Nelson would yield for a question.
He will yield. Representative Creasure.
I would think that at 2:21 in the morning, we would certainly be up for transparency. And in all of my dealings with business, I have found that if you're willing to commit to something with a handshake, you're willing to put it into writing. Is it a problem that we have 14-point font? Is there a worry that we would ever go below that? Is there any standard we're trying to miss here? This seems to me very simple that we would go ahead and agree to this. We're going to be handing this out to all sorts of people throughout the state.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I stated, this is the card they're sending out. This meets the BMS's, what their requirements are, what their suggestions are. If you look at the type of this, it's much larger. There's nothing printed on here that's smaller than an 18-point type, except for maybe the union bug in the corner. Members, this is unnecessary, and it goes way beyond what is required by any other union election or any other election of this type.
Representative Creasure.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'm waiting for the handout. I haven't seen the handout. Thank you. Thank you. And so as I look at this, Representative Nelson, you're right, this is very readable. And again, just to make sure that there's no confusion, I mean, we want to do this right. Would there be any problem with putting in just a simple little amendment saying that this is 14 point? This is certainly over 14 point, so we're already there. If we can agree to it on the House floor, is it something that we're sure is going to happen, that is there any chance at all? I just don't understand, Representative Nelson. This seems pretty simple. So if you'd yield, are you absolutely sure that there's no way this would ever be changed below that?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
Again, this is what the AFSCME has said they're using for their, this is the card they're going to be handing out, and this is what they've assured me that they're going to be handing out, and this meets and exceeds the requirements that are already set in the BMS standards.
Representative Krisha.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And another thing I'd like to point out, members, on the amendment, we certainly have this one example here, and this is what we would call in the advertising a mock-up or a draft. But in this amendment, it would be all written materials. And so anything that we're going to provide to them as we're out there talking and looking for signatures, any material that's going to be in their hands, this is a very big and weighty decision. And by the amount of people standing outside our door, I would think a little bit of assurance that we're not going to put something in there that they couldn't read. So I would just urge a green vote and ask your support, members.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson yield?
He will yield. Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, how many materials would this organization hand out to potential union or potential union members or those who may be interested in signing up? How many materials? Because the amendment says materials. So how many might be handed out?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know. It could be a lot. It could be letters. It could be questions to or answers to questions that individuals have. This is the card. This is the authorization card that they're going to be passing out. The Commissioner of the Bureau of Mediation Services has stated that putting the ballots and the other stuff, all the other materials that you're talking about, would make it unwielding for them to do their job and do the election, because that would have to include all the materials they have to send out. And so, members, this is a frivolous amendment. It goes beyond what anybody else ever has to do, and so therefore, members, I urge a red vote.
Representative Erickson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members and Representative Nelson, it says materials, and it says at least 14. So in the world of graphics, in which I have worked for many, many years, we're going to use different type sizes and fonts throughout a piece of material that you want to distribute. And so this is a very reasonable amendment that uses the phrase "at least" so that it'll be very readable, and the fonts can be any larger than that and any other style. This is just about making sure materials, not just this card, are readable. Let's vote green on this, members.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, I have in front of me now the mock-up of the mailing, or I guess the form. Can you tell me how this form will be delivered to the recipient?
Representative Nelson.
Representative Barrett and members, and Mr. Speaker, if this follows a normal organizing drive, if that's what they're doing here, this would be handed out to the individuals as they're being talked to by the people that are trying to get them to sign the card. And it would probably be done face-to-face, one-on-one.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, if you could refer to page 3, lines 3.6, and explain to me what that line says.
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, can he repeat that? I did not hear what he said.
Representative Barrett.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nelson, I'd like you to read for the body what, under the Senate File 778, line 3.6, if you could read to the body and let us know what that line says.
Representative Nelson.
I still didn't get the number.
Line 3.6.
What it says there is certification election for family care providers will be conducted by mail ballot. This is the card, the authorization card that we're talking about here. The mail ballot is sent out by the BMS, not by the union. So the election will be done by a mail ballot, and that'll be mailed out to the homes of the individuals who are certified as being in the bargain unit. And that comes from the Bureau of Mediation Services, not the union.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, would you yield for another question?
He will yield. Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, the form that you just described, is this the form that would be mailed?
Representative Nelson.
No.
Representative Barrett.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nelson, what would this form do then?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the authorization card. If you read the bill, and if you follow the procedures that are done by the Bureau of Mediation Services, but in the bill, first they have to get 500 people that want to say they expressed an interest in getting, or get 500 of these cards signed, to get a list from the Bureau of Mediation Services. And then they'd have to get 30% of the number that the Bureau of Mediation Services say are in the bargaining unit. 30% of the members sign this card to get the minimum to get to an election. And this is the card that the union will be getting members to sign to say, yes, I want to belong to your union, and I want you to be my bargaining agent.
Representative Barrett.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nelson, if you could tell me what the font size is this card, what both size and type of font, please.
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know. It's bigger than 18 point. I know that from or 14 point, what the amendment says, excuse me. But I don't know what the font. That's not what the business that I'm in.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, if you could refer me to the lines in Senate File 778 that refer to this form and refer to the font size. If you would yield for a question, please.
He will yield. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the font size and the size of the card and the stuff that goes in that is specified in the Bureau of Mediation Services in their procedures that they do to follow, that they use to follow for all election certification and decertification. That's in the Bureau of Mediation Services rules that are already established, that they use and have been using for over 40 years. And as they told me, that they conduct anywhere from 60 to 80 of these elections per year. And so they're well versed in how to do that, and they have the rules that they set up for that. That is not in the bill.
Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, I guess I would say then that it would be appropriate for us to add it to the bill, which is what the amendment does, and I would support the amendment. Please vote yes on the amendment.
Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Nelson would yield to a question, please.
He will. Representative Franzen.
Representative Nelson, so who is going to be looking over the unions when they are handing out these cards that you passed out that you claim are going to be readable?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bureau of Mediation Services is who oversees elections of this nature.
Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If Representative Nelson would yield to another question, please.
He will. Representative Franzen.
Representative Nelson, I'm wondering, while the unions have been going door to door to child care providers' homes during business hours. Could you tell the body and to the public who has been overseeing that effort?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. When they go to start their organizing drive and go out to the homes, if there are practices and complaints that people have, they would be directed to the Bureau of Mediation Services, who will look into those as far as whether there are possibility of unfair labor practices, and that would be, again, the Bureau of Mediation Services does that job.
Representative Franson.
If Representative Nelson would yield to another question, please.
He will yield. Representative Franson.
Representative Nelson, you probably have read the article that came out in the Sauk Herald News that went all over the state yesterday. Did you have a chance to read those comments at all by any chance?
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, members, no, I don't get the Sauk Herald News, and nobody provided me a copy of it, and so I have not read that, and it does not pertain to the bill.
Representative Franson.
All right, thanks, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, I'm just trying to find that article online here, and I'm not, but able to pull it up. But there were a lot of concerns from providers of intimidation and harassment. Could you inform the body and to the public and to the providers that are outside what the process would be? If an organizer comes to the door and harasses a provider and they feel like they're being harassed, what would the process be? I do have a copy here, so thank you to my colleagues. Let's see here. This one is a child care provider in the metro area, and she had a few seconds worth of contact with an AFSCME organizer just this week. This provider said, that she told them that they had 5 seconds to get off the property because they were trespassing. And then she started counting down from 5 at the top of her lungs. Good. And she said that worked. Now, is this something that you would suggest, or perhaps should they just call the cops? Could you just inform the providers and the body and the public what the steps would be if they felt like they were being harassed?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think this is to the amendment, so it has nothing to do with font size. But I think if somebody's being harassed and somebody's on their property they don't want, they can call the police and have them removed.
Representative Franson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, thank you for that answer. And it did have to do, sorry, I should have explained. Now they're going to go around again, I assume, hopefully, and get new cards signed. But previously, they were coming during child care lunch hours, and it's extremely chaotic. I don't know if you've ever done child care for a living before, but that's a business that I used to have before getting elected. And so lunchtime, I can tell you, can be chaotic. You're cooking for, up to 14 children if you have a helper in the home. And so the providers were being visited by organizers during that specific time of lunchtime, and just they were so busy that the organizers just said, here's a card, sign for more information. And so they signed, busy watching 14 children, and didn't have time to read the fine print. So I just want to make sure that this is going to be, I'm hoping that you accept the amendment, and members, that we're having cards within the guideline here, 14 font or higher, so that there is no mistake and we don't have to revisit this next year.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would the Honorable Representative Nelson yield to a question?
He will. Representative Quam.
Thank you. And, even at this hour, I see people in the gallery. I see and hear people outside. And I do appreciate this, but as I look at the people in the gallery, I notice your blue tie. And I also notice that in some of your some of the material, you have more than just one entity listed. And as I look up, I see more than green. I see purple like your tie. And seeing that makes me wonder, where's the example for the other entities that are looking at providing an organization to the daycare providers?
Was that a question for Representative Nelson?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. That was, since Representative Nelson said he would yield and he distributed the material, I was wondering where the material or example card to show us that it's legible from the other entities. For example, the fine citizens wearing purple in our gallery.
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I asked for the one copy to show what they were handing out, the one group. I did ask for a copy from the other group, but they've been handing out a card similar to this one here.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Nelson. Frankly, you said it was redundant and unneeded, and it might be with some, but, we don't generally just assume. That's why when we have materials in regards to our election and many activities, there are parameters. So I don't see that it's frivolous, and frankly, if as you say, they already meet or exceed the requirements on this amendment, I don't understand why we don't just accept it, and that way we have some comfort and some guarantee. But I assume others in my caucus will add to the debate and discussion on this amendment, because frankly we think that this is not trivial, especially considering citizens on both sides of this debate are present. And they're not just casually present. They're dedicated enough to stay through the day, through the evening, and it looks like into the morning. And so therefore, I think we should treat this with the due respect that the process requires and accept this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, would Representative Nelson yield to a question?
He will yield. Representative Pepin.
Representative Nelson, I've looked at the card that I believe that you said would be sent out, and I've taken the opportunity to review the font size and part of it, and I believe, based on my comparison with other point font, I believe that part of the card is in point 12 font, the bottom half of the card, and I've held it up in comparison to several other point 12 fonts, and I'm wondering if you could yield an answer if you have verified for yourself that the card will be in larger than 12-point font.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, these rules are governed by the Bureau of Mediation Services and their examples, and they're the ones that set the side and tell them what they need to do, and that's already in current law, and the Bureau of Mediation Services have been conducting these elections for over 40 years and doing a fine job of it, and we already have those rules in place and what it has to be done. And Mr. Speaker, would now be appropriate time to ask for a roll call?
A roll call is already on this. That was requested right at the beginning. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, you've referenced this a couple of laws. I think you just said the law, the Bureau of Mediation Services states the law. I'm looking at the website. Could you direct the body to the website where it discusses the requirement for the point font for these forced unionization cards that are going to be mailed out? If you could direct us to the website so we could all review it. And I guess I'm under the belief of trust but verify. So if you could direct us to the appropriate location and you'd yield, I'd really appreciate it.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there's going around another handout here that I thought was going to get out earlier. It's Minnesota Rules 5510.0310, having to deal with elections by the Bureau and determine the eligibility of employees. And if people have questions, there's a phone number and a website there, or a web address, not our email address to contact. And again, the Bureau of Mediation Services conducts these elections, and they're the ones that determine the size, and they determine that, and they've been doing this very well for the last 40 years.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson continue to yield?
He will. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, I've had an opportunity to read the Bureau of Mediation brochure that you handed out, and I don't see on here where it says the font size requirement. Could you direct the body to where it says the font size requirement?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
It's in the rules. That's in the. This is just a screen page of that, but it's in the rules.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for Representative Nelson, would continue to yield?
He will. Representative Pepin.
I see where it references the rule. It says filing valid authorization cards signed and dated by at least 30% of the employees within the proposed unit in accordance with Minnesota Rule Part 5510.0810. In the sample below, I don't see in the sample below where it says anything about font size, but it does appear to me that the font size in this brochure is about 10 point. I haven't had an opportunity to thoroughly review it to find out the point font type. Is that the rule that you're talking about that does not list the font size?
Representative Nelson.
The Bureau of Mr. Speaker, the Bureau of Mediation Services would be the one that set this, and they've been doing this for the last 40 years.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, if you'd continue to yield.
He will. Representative Pepin.
Representative Nelson, under point 3, I see that the filing valid authorization cards must be signed and dated by at least 30%. Is that also the case in your bill? Have you changed it since the committee when it was only 10%?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, we are doing the Senate file, and if you read the bill, the Senate file has 30%.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, that's a relief, because I hope that you saw in the wisdom that 10% would be really, really outrageous. I think 30% is a little outrageous too. But getting back to the font size, as a Representative Nelson, I'm wondering, I noticed that you have glasses, Representative Nelson, and have you ever had problems reading if you don't have your glass? I'm not sure if you're farsighted or nearsighted. Wondering if you've ever had problems reading when you haven't had your glasses on.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm nearsighted, and so I have no problem reading things close up. I have problems reading things across the room, and in fact, if I took my glasses off, I wouldn't be able to see you. But maybe that might not be all bad tonight. But anyway, little joke. But at times, with the way my eyes are, I'll take my glasses off to read fine things and do fine work. And so, yes, I've had trouble with glasses. I've worn glasses since I've been in 3rd grade.
Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, well, I would submit, Representative Nelson, by the end of the night, you will want to take your glasses off so that you not only can avoid looking at me, but the rest of this side of the aisle. Wondering if you would continue to yield for questions.
He will. Representative Pepin.
Representative Nelson, I don't see that, as we went before, I don't see anywhere where it talked about the font size. I don't see anything in this card whatsoever that indicates that. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to perhaps print a copy out of Rule 5510.0410 and show us where the font size is listed.
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, it's on the web's page, and I think it'd be easier, and it might be a waste of paper, although that would create some jobs in northern Minnesota. I think all the members here are capable of getting that on their own.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Nelson, I think this bill is a waste of time in the waning hours of session when we're we're moving forward with this. We haven't finished our budget bills. We're apparently forcing child care unions to, child care providers to unionize against their will. Mr. Speaker, point of order under Rule 3.33. I am wondering if it would be in order to modify as a technical amendment the word 14 on line 1.4 to 15.
No.
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, last night when we debated the bill to raise legislators' salary by constitutional amendment, the Speaker ruled that a date change was a mere technical change. How would a mere numerical change of point font be different than a date change under the custom and usage that was set by the Speaker?
The amendment says 14-point font, and 15-point font is different than 14-point font. Yesterday, the reviser advised us that that date that was changed didn't make sense within the context of the amendment, and the reviser itself suggested that the change. So it was a reviser's change. This is not.
Mr. Speaker, that's unfortunate that you would make that ruling because, frankly, there are going to be a lot of people there's two parts of this amendment. This one is daycare providers. The other part of the amendment is going to deal with the personal care attendants. And a lot of these folks might have vision impairments. The PCA providers, if this bill passes, we're going to be requiring grandparents who are taking care of their grandkids perhaps to organize. And some of the older people have vision issues. I know my dad has had cataract surgery. His vision isn't important, and I'm wondering what would be the issue. If I don't understand, it's just 14-point font. That's all we're asking. I'm wondering, Representative Nelson, is there some fear that you have if members or if child care workers would get this that you wouldn't want it to be in 14-point font, that you'd want it to be in fine print? Is there some reason that you couldn't just accept this as a friendly amendment?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. My conversations with the head of Mr. Tilson, the head of the BMS, has stated that specifying this type of amendment, specifying font size, makes it difficult for him to do his job and do his job in an impartial manner, and that's why I'm urging a red vote on this amendment.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, I urge a green vote. Here we are debating this issue in the middle of the night. We're debating an issue on whether or not we're going to force child care providers to unionize. And then we're going to apparently not be concerned with fine print. So with that, when they get these cards where some of them supposedly are allowed to be able to vote, some of them might not even be able to read it because I can't see anything. You haven't provided anything to us that shows exactly what the font size is. So I'm very disappointed that you wouldn't be supporting this and take it as a friendly amendment. It's common sense. Let's be on the up and up, make sure everybody knows what this is about. So I'm really surprised that you wouldn't take this, Representative Nelson. And members, I would urge a green vote.
Representative Anderson P.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Would the author yield for a question, please?
He will yield. Representative Anderson.
Representative Nelson, the card you handed out to us, or the paper with the example of the Ask Me card, is that the same card that they've been going around already with to daycare folks across the state and encouraging a sign-up? Is this an example of the same card, Representative Nelson?
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, that's my understanding.
Representative Anderson.
Well, we have incidents or stories here of time after time after time there's been at least confusion. Some would say possible harassment at the wrong times of the day. There seems to be a problem here with communication, and this amendment would go at least part ways in eliminating some of the confusion of what people are signing up for when they sign a card such as this, because some folks signed these cards and didn't really know what they were signing up for. Thank you.
Representative Scott. Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just would the author please yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted by a few folks and kind of speaking to the font size. How does it work if providers are blind? And how would that process work when it comes to filling out this application? And what provisions are made forth for that situation?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I have a picture in my head of a daycare provider with many kids running around, as Representative Franson talking about at lunchtime, trying to cook food and being blind. I can't imagine that, but I don't know how that would work. That would, again, the rules for that are covered. How that would be handled by the Bureau of Mediation Services.
Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason I ask that is, my father is blind, and there's a potential they watch our children at times, and they've never been approached by this, and so that was definitely a concern of those and others that I've visited with. Mr. Speaker, would the author please yield for another question?
He will. Representative Swedzinski.
Thank you. So when we're talking about the font size, in that, how long will this need to be in the possession? So if there's any confusion about that, so if it's mailed out, but also potentially delivered, hand delivered, and hand asked about the particular ballot in context of how large the font is, what is the how long will it either need to? How long can the people be talked to until it needs to be sent in or thrown away when it's received? How long kind of a period does the vote need to be either thrown away or turned back into the folks for it to count?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, the Bureau of Mediation Services handles these elections. They've been handling them in a fine job for the last 40 years. As far as font, and this question has nothing to do with the amendment, which is about font size, but my understanding on how these elections work is once they start the election process, they've got 6 months to get the card signed, to get enough to get into an election. And so, and if somebody gets a card and decides, changes their mind and signs it, later on they can call the union back up and say, I want my card back, and they give them back. It doesn't do the union any good to upset people or harass people or turn people off if you're trying to sell them on what you're trying to do. I don't think any door-to-door salesperson would do that because they're not going to make a sale, and that's basically what these people are trying to do.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson yield to a question?
He will, Representative Scott.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just happened to walk out and visit with some of the folks, the daycare providers out there, and they showed me this card. And the font, guess what? It's much smaller than what you handed out, Representative Nelson. If you'd like to come over and see, you can. The font is much smaller. So there's nothing in these rules. We've looked over the website. There's nothing in these rules that say what the font size shall be. Representative Nelson, who oversees this Minnesota, whatever it's called, the BM something? Bureau of Mediation Services.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Bureau of Mediation Services is an executive branch agency of the state of Minnesota, and they're the ones that oversee that.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, have we ever written any legislation that would be applicable to the rules that they have to go by? Representative Nelson, if he would yield.
He will yield. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm assuming we have written some legislation in the past overseeing them. I'm assuming that they've gone through the rulemaking process that we have set up in the state as a state agency. But I don't know, in my tenure here, I don't know if we've ever done, I've kept track of that.
Representative Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Nelson, it seems to me that this amendment would be perfectly in order. It seems to me like we can write legislation and give them some parameters for certain things. So if we have a card here and the font size is considerably smaller than what you handed out, even if this is the one that they're going to use tomorrow, there's nothing saying that they can't go back to this the following week. Am I correct, Representative Nelson?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I've been instructed, or I've been told, that this is the card they're going to use. So, Mr. Speaker, this would be covered by the Bureau of Mediation Services. They're the one who will be conducting this election. They're the one that will be overseeing the election. And they've been doing this for 40 years, and they've been doing a fine job.
Representative Scott.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Nelson, I don't know what we as members are to believe. Because if they can come out with something smaller than what you handed out, they could come out with something even smaller than this. Because there are no parameters that this Bureau of Mediation Services goes by for font size. You know what? When I have my glasses on and I read stuff up close, I can't read it. And these people that you are sending out are coming to these daycare providers when they're serving the kids lunch. They don't have time to read this stuff. They just take a glance at it. Same thing with the PCAs. You show up when they're assisting the people that they're supposed to be helping and being paid, they're on their job. Members, I encourage a green vote. I think this is really disingenuous.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson rise for a question or two?
He will. Representative Petersburg.
Representative Nelson, I want to make sure that we're talking and make sure that we're really clear on what's going on here in regards to this card and as you say, the rules and regulations that represent and reflect this. This sheet that you've given me that says Bureau of Mediation Services, top line it says representation, public employee certification. Is that what you're talking about? Is what will define and direct these parameters?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, this is a screenshot from their webpage. And the rules that would be providing for this are listed on there. They have to conform to statute, Minnesota Statute 179A, as it says on the card here, on the sheet here, and Minnesota Rules Part 5510, as is on the sheet here. That's the rules that they use to conduct the elections, and it's what they've been doing for the last 40 years at the Minnesota Bureau of Mediation Services.
Representative Petersburg.
All right. Thank you. And I think from what I understand from you that this is for public employee certification, which I guess begs the question, Representative Nelson, if he would yield for another question.
He will yield. Representative Petersburg.
The question for you, Representative Nelson, is are you aware if any of these people that will be given these cards are public employees or if they're private sector employees?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And these people are unorganized employees, and there are people out there, and they've expressed an interest to try and form a bargaining unit. And this is what the bill is about. We're going to determine what they are and give them the opportunity, if they want to form a bargaining unit.
Representative Petersburg.
Well, thank you for that answer, but the answer is that almost all of them are not hired by the state. They really are hired by individuals, meaning they are private sector employees, and certainly this doesn't apply at all, whether there is any negotiations or not. So in this regard, putting the size of font certainly is appropriate, since none of these would apply because they are private sector employees. And so if he would yield for another question.
He will yield. Representative Petersburg.
I'm wondering how you justify having the rules and regulations for a certain group of people, in this case public employees, how you can refer that to private sector who are actually hired by individuals and groups and not the state. It seems like that is contradictory.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. In the bill, they're going to be organized, if they get organized, if the bill passes, if they vote to get enough authorization cards signed to get to an election. They will be, the bill identifies them under 179A, which is the Public Employee Labor Relations Act. And that's why I handed out the example of the public employee card. There's a similar card if you go on the web page for private employers and employees. And if you look on the back side of that card, they list the procedures for the decertification process. If a union is formed, what they have to go through the same procedures that are overseen by the Bureau of Mediation Services. And again, the font size that we're talking about here is more prescriptive than what we have to do for our own elections. In our own elections, it says, simply say that the disclosures must be in conspicuous type.
Representative Petersburg.
Well, again, thank you for your clarification, except that earlier you did say that this was the defining and prescribing rules and regulations which are for public employees, which these individuals certainly are not. And so I guess that begs the question, exactly where are we and what are we talking about? It seems to me that we are trying to change individuals that are hired by other individuals and make them direct government employees. And I believe the bill actually talks about Minnesota becoming the employer of record. And until that happens, I'm not sure that we can even allow employees to be certified this way, because it doesn't follow according to these prescriptions. So in regards to the font that we're really talking about here, since these rules no longer apply, then I think we certainly can talk and have legislation to define the font. So I would certainly ask for a green vote. Thank you.
Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Would the author yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative McDonald.
Yeah, Representative, can you... I got to get my reading glasses on. Can you tell me where the phone number is on this card here? Is it too small a font? I can't seem to find it here.
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, I guess I'm not sure what card he's talking about. I know which one. I don't one he's looking at. If he's looking at the one for the BMS services, it's in the middle of the page, 651-649-5426.
Representative McDonald.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Representative, I'm sorry not to be so clear. Again, the fonts are so small I couldn't find out exactly, but it's the one that you passed out, the Ask Me card.
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker and Representative McDonald, this is the card the people are going to sign. And if I was going to be conducting this, I'd be handing them my business card with my name and my phone number on my business card, and that would be standard business card side, and that's what the people would keep. This is what they turn in to the union or to the organizer to saying that, yes, I want to join.
Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, would the author yield for another question?
He will. Representative McDonald.
Representative Nelson, you brought up a good point. I'm a businessman, as you know. I'm an independent, mom and pop, self-employed businessman, my wife and I. And when I want to solicit business, I do pass out a business card with information. The font size is small, but I'm going to redo it because I know at my age it needs to be bigger for folks to read it so they're clear. But you made a very interesting point. There's a phone number on there. I don't know one business person that wouldn't be wise enough to put a phone number on there, because as a business person, you want that person to call you for more information. And as you said in your opening statement, you said something very profound. You said you may wonder why we're even doing this. Yeah, 86% of daycare providers are wondering why you're doing this. Business owners are wondering why you're doing this. 86% of mom and pop family daycare providers are wondering why you're doing this. We who are perhaps been reading this issue know why we're doing this, and we'll get to that later. And then you said you're doing this for those that are interested can attempt to do it. I'm not sure what you meant there, but I believe you meant for those who are interested to sign up and join a union can do that. So, on the card that you passed out here that you're going to pass out, could you tell me where's the phone number so those, in your words, that are interested can attempt to do it, can call to find out more information?
Representative Nelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as you said, Representative McDonald, as a businessman, when you go to hand out and you go to talk to people, you hand them your business card. This is the card they're going to turn back in to the organizer if they're interested in joining. And they're going to be doing that. So they won't have this card, so there's no phone number on it because there's no need for a phone number on this because they won't have this card. They're going to be handed probably a business card from that organizer saying, this is who I am. If you have any questions, call me.
Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, would the author yield for another question?
He will. Representative McDonald.
Representative Nelson, you said probably hand them a card. By what do you mean that the person will probably hand the individual a card? What on earth are you talking about?
Representative Nelson.
Mr. Speaker, members, when you go out to do this, you hand them a card saying, this is who I am, and if you have interest, call me back. If you hand them this card, that's the signature card that they're going to sign and turn back in. And that's why there's not a phone number on it, because there doesn't need the person won't have this in their possession. It'll be given to the union representative who's trying to sign them up.
Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, last question for me on this amendment. Representative Nelson, would you yield for a question?
He will yield. Representative McDonald.
You're a kind gentleman. You're up for a great battle, I'm sure. Again, in your opening statement, you said for those that are interested, they could attempt to do it, whatever that means. But I think I know what you mean, to sign up. And last question, and I'll sit down. What is AFSCME, AFL-CIO, ASME-CLO? What does that mean? What's the acronym for?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. And the AFL-CIO is the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of International Organizations.
Representative McDonald.
Mr. Speaker, I would find this a little arrogant to assume that everyone that gets a card will know what that means. So if those are interested, perhaps you should spell that out so people know exactly what those acronyms are, so those who are interested might decide that they may want to join.
Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the dark of the night while Minnesota sleeps, I want to talk to this amendment. After I retired from the Navy, I got into the publishing business. I published the newspaper, the Veterans Journal. And I went back to the website that I remember having to go to and learn about typography and sizing and things like that. And when a mailing is mailed to individuals, see, an organization has to take into consideration the audience that it's being mailed to prior to determining the font sizes on the printed materials. And so I've got a question for the author, please.
He will yield. Representative Leidiger.
Who is the audience that we're mailing this card to that's going to now? Is that going to be the owners of the organization? Is it the employees of the organization? What types of people are getting this? mailing? Owners or the employees?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This card that we've passed out the copy of would be going to the workers, the daycare providers. In this case, in one case, in the case of this card, the personal care attendants. In the case of the personal care attendant part of the bill.
Representative Leidiger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The workers. Now, the worker could be an owner of the organization or the work, because I was, of course, in my organization, I worked at it and I owned the organization. So it could be an owner or it could be an employee. And that covers, it's the worker, right? So it's going to the workers, so it could be going to the owners, and if it's the owner, may be the only worker. Are there cases where that would be true?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
Yes.
Representative Leidiger.
Well, in my expert opinion, I would say that this is a very valid amendment, that 14-point size would be very appropriate to print up these cards. Owners, in particular, having to read a lot of materials, go through a lot of different materials coming across their desk. Owners like to see things in big type, so I recommend a green vote on this amendment.
Representative Anderson S.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson yield?
He will. Representative Anderson S.
Representative Nelson, you had handed out this information. Representative Scott, she had pointed to the actual font size and the actual card that has been handed out. Can you just tell me, how are any audits performed by the Bureau of Mediation Services in this process?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, the Bureau of Mediation Services is a part of conducting an election. They certify the size of the bargaining unit so that whoever's trying to organize them, be it AFSCME, be it SEIU, be it Daycare Providers United, be it any group or organization that would choose to try and do this. And if you look in the bill, there's nothing in the bill that states AFSCME or SEIU or any organization, because any organization has the same ability to try and organize these people if they choose. But the Bureau of Mediation Services certifies who's eligible to be in the bargaining unit, which gives a round number to get to the 30%. When they bring in the cards to 30%, they go back and they verify and they audit these cards to make sure that the signatures are valid. And so, yes, the Bureau of Mediation Services does this.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Nelson, I think you misunderstood my question. I'm asking, what do they actually do in the performance of the audits? Can you give me the item by item, what their steps that they take to ensure that the cards that are released say what they say they're going to say? How do they do that? Do they randomly contact people that these were supposed to be sent to? Do they make sure that the list that they're using is proper? What can you tell me about that auditing process?
Representative Nelson.
Again, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Again, the Bureau of Mediation Services follows the procedures that they've been following for the last 40 years. And I don't know every ins and out of everything specific thing they don't do, but it's done by the Bureau of Mediation Services, and they've been doing a grand job of doing this for the last 40 years.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Nelson, if you don't know what they've been doing for the last 40 years, how can you know if they're doing a grand job? Let me ask you this. When was the last time that the Bureau of Mediation Services was audited for their work?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
I don't have an answer to that question. They're a part of the state government, and I'm assuming that their budget comes through us here. And I'm assuming at some point in time this legislative auditor has looked at what they do, because that's part of what the legislative auditor does, is look at the departments of the state government and make sure they're doing their job.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Representative Nelson, you're not aware of any legislative auditor report reviewing the actions of the Bureau of Mediation Services to make sure that they're following Minnesota statute. So we have no clue if they're actually following what we have in statute, if they actually are following proper audit procedures, that they are looking to make sure that these cards are going out properly, that it is the correct language that's being used, that we know that the citizens, when they are receiving these cards, actually have the proper information that they need to make a decision on these cards, whether it's yay or nay. My concern, Representative Nelson, is because you don't know this, you haven't known it for 40 years, about what takes place on these audits and whether an audit has ever been performed. My question is how can we guarantee that this is going to be performed properly? We have countless stories in newspaper articles showing that it hasn't been done properly. That 40 years has not been spotless. Clearly, there are problems in this process, Representative Nelson, and I want to know what kind of integrity are you providing in this bill? Because as I look at it now, there is no integrity. We have citizens that have time and again expressed concern about how this process has taken place. And what's worse is we're not even following the guidelines that we follow for every other election. Instead of having a 30% threshold, we're looking at a 10% threshold for this. Representative Nelson, I think that you maybe need to check out and see what the Bureau of Mediation Services are doing. No discredit to them, but an organization, no matter what size or how long they've been in operation, will always have trouble along the way. That is the whole point that we have the legislative auditor, is to make sure that these things don't happen. It's to double check. Because as we've seen here this legislative cycle, we've had the different agencies that have been reviewing citizens' private data. A couple of different agencies that have done that. In fact, I think that you maybe were a co-author of one of those bills. So we know very well that problems exist, and you have no means. Oh, excuse me, Representative Murphy, I can't see Representative Nelson when you're standing there. Do you mind if you could move, please? Representative Murphy. You make a better door than a window. Thank you so much. Representative Nelson, if you could, please, reconsider this. I think Representative Krisha is doing a great job here in just asking for a little integrity, making sure that we have a 14-size font. You know, I'm a mom. I know it's hard. You get a lot of materials, whether it's this group or other groups. You get a lot of mail when you have kids. Let's at least make sure that when they get something, any of the written materials that are put before them, that they can at least have a font size that is reasonable to read within the short period of time that they have. So I encourage you all to support the Krisha amendment.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would the Representative Nelson yield for a couple questions?
He'd be glad to. Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, I'm looking pertinent to line 3.6 of the bill. And I just have a question with regard to, it says conducted by mail ballot. Could you help me understand what type of mail that describes, if you would yield?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that's first-class mail, but that is controlled by that, again, the rules that the Bureau of Mediation Services have, and it's what they use it's how they conduct their elections, and it's in their rules that are in Chapter 5505. And there are many rules relating to the administration of elections in there, including investigations of fraudulent acts and invalid cards, etc. And Representative, I just want to raise a point to what something Representative Anderson said. She needs to read the bill, because the bill is, again, the Senate language, as I said earlier, and it's no longer 10%, it's 30% is what the Senate language is.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the representative continue to yield?
He will. Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, so the mail, as you describe it, is going by way of USPS. Have there been any instances under collective bargaining where ballots and or elections have been adjudicated via email or electronic balloting? If you would yield.
Representative Nelson.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could you repeat that last part again?
Representative Nelson, in the course of elections, is it exclusive to the United States Postal Service for balloting and of elections, or in any other collective bargaining election have the ballots been delivered via electronic mail?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No. They're done by mail, which would be the U.S. Post Office, not electronic mail. They're mailed out to them. It's a procedure that they follow, similar to what we do in our elections for absentee ballots or mail-in ballots that we have on counties. They're mailed out with an envelope. The ballot's in there. You put the thing in the envelope. You put your information on the outside of the envelope. It's mailed back to the BMS. The BMS receives these. They keep all these till the day of the election or the day of the tally. They open the envelope to make sure the card is properly. Number one, they'll look on the outside of the envelope to make sure that person is in the bargaining unit and is able to vote. And if they are, they open the envelope, take the ballot out, and put it in a ballot box, and then they all get counted at the end. And that's the procedure that they use at the Bureau of Mediation Services.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, in an earlier response to questions, I believe you mentioned that you would be hand-delivering these ballots, but now you're saying that they can be mailed. I'm just wondering if there's a protocol that on the example that you handed out, I don't see a return envelope. Is there an envelope included with the ballot that's provided to the prospective member, or are they only given back to the person that's delivering the ballot via the business card that you deliver at the same time?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think there's some confusion here. This is not the ballot. This is the authorization card. 30% of the people in the bargaining unit need to sign this authorization card before the union or the organization that wants to represent these people can ask for an election. Once they get to that magic number or above that magic number, because I don't think they're going to wait to ask for an election if they only have 30%, because they'll lose with only 30% authorization cards. But once they get the number of authorization cards they need to get to an election, they hand these over to the Bureau of Mediation Services, who then verifies that there are proper signatures and they're properly filled out, and the people whose names are on these cards belong to the bargaining unit. And then the Bureau of Mediation Services, our state agency that handles these elections, mails out and takes over and runs the election, and they're the ones that do it. The union has nothing to do with it other than when they count the ballots, they're able to have an observer there. But it's all, the election is handled by the Minnesota Bureau of Mediation Services, not the union.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And then I guess I'm just curious then in terms of to the Cretia amendment where it speaks to 14-point font, would that be applicable to the ballot as well, or only to the informational materials that we're suggesting? Would it not extend to the size font that would be on the ballot? If you would yield, Mr. Speaker.
He will yield. Representative Nelson.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. I was reading my my text that came into me. Could you repeat the question, Representative Albright?
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just wondering if the example that you handed out in terms of the informational card, if that also purports to the size font that would be used on the ballot as well. If you would yield, Mr. Speaker.
He will yield. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the way I read the amendment, it would apply to the materials, those materials also. And again, that is why Commissioner Tilson from the Bureau of Mediation Services has asked that this amendment not go on, that an amendment like this does not go on. They had the same argument in the Senate, because it would restrict him and make his job of having to conduct the election a non-partial election, which is what their job is in the state of Minnesota to do, unwieldy and difficult for them to do in a proper manner.
Representative Albright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to Representative Nelson, I'm just confused then in terms of for the Office of Mediation Services why it would become unwieldy to be specific in terms of the type font that is used, given the fact that, as you've said and others here, and as I use as on a daily basis, nearsighted people and whatnot, for clarity, for an understanding, not only just for the informational card, but also for the ballot, more than anything to make sure that we don't have spoiled ballots, which could be of a concern if we are to have a successful election outcome. If you would just speak to that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I've said before, the Bureau of Mediation Services has been conducting these elections for over 40 years. They've been doing a great job of doing it. We have not had complaints that I have read about how elections turn out. Some people may be disappointed with the results, but they've been conducting these impartial elections for the last 40 years, and they've been following the procedures, and that's the procedures we're wishing to follow here.
Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Cretia yield for a question?
Representative Cretia will yield. Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Cretia, I think we have a slight problem, and Mr. Speaker, maybe you can help us out with this. It looks like it might just need a technical change, because as I look at fonts, we've been talking about the 14-point font, but as I look through Word here, and I've got the French script font up, for example, the 14-point font is really, really small. And then I see if I go to the Times New Roman, it's actually fairly large. But the problem is we've got about 380 different fonts here, and I'm wondering maybe others can weigh in on what their favorite would be, or how big that font really would be. But I'm wondering if maybe just a technical change to the actual font would be in order.
Did you ask Representative Cretia to yield? Representative
Yes,
Cretia. Do you want to yield, Representative Cretia? Okay, Representative Cretia.
And thank you, Representative Kelly. And do you want me to go through all the fonts? I could start with Cambria, and then we could go through the whole list. What are you asking me?
Well, I'm wondering, Representative Cretia, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Kelly.
Representative Cretia, maybe if rather than waste the body's time, with something this technical, maybe we could lay this over for a while, and everybody could weigh in and maybe come and talk to you about the different fonts that would work best, and maybe we could move on then.
Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson yield to some questions?
He will. Representative Pepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Nelson. While we've had some follow-up questions, I was able to look up the citations that were listed on this membership card, and it was Minnesota Administrative Rules 5510.0410 filing petition. It listed subpart A, or subpart 1A, and I'm reading it. It says, conditions to file a petition, an employee organization or exclusive representative must A, have a written constitution or bylaws that provide for 1, election of officers, 2, filling of vacancies in elected offices, and 3, a purpose which in whole or part must be to deal with public employees concerning grievances and terms and conditions of employment. What, Representative Nelson, where does it specify that they have to have a certain font size in that administrative rule?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, that's The Bureau of Mediation Services are the ones that set and accept what the cards can be.
Representative Pepin.
Mr. Speaker, okay, Representative Nelson, I don't see it there anywhere, and I'm also looking at 179A.03, which is the other spot that's listed, subdivision 6, and it says employee organization. Employee organization means any union or organization of public employees whose purpose is, in a whole or part, to deal with public employers concerning grievances and terms and conditions of employment. I don't see it there anywhere, and I actually looked up font size, or font, in Minnesota statutes, and it was listed several times, but I didn't see it listed anywhere in the Labor Relations Act. So, Representative Nelson, I really don't see what the big deal is. If it's your intent that, I mean, if you believe that it's important for people to be able to read what they're signing on to, I really don't understand why it would be a big deal. It's not listed anywhere. I know you you think it is, but it's not listed here anymore. But if you think it is anyway, why not just accept this amendment? I won't ask you to yield. I know we've got, another 100 amendments or so, so I'll stop there, but I really don't understand why we wouldn't want to accept this amendment and just make it crystal clear, since it is not listed as far as I can tell, and you have not directed us anywhere in statute or administrative rules where it's at.
Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'll address to my good friend, Representative Kelly. Yes, I'll agree to lay this over. Let's move on and look further at it. Just as a final word, there's 7 statutes members that reference font size, and one of those in particular, as I mentioned earlier, 327C.095, where in park closings, it's important enough to be mentioned in health standards, paid advertisement news, special conditions, unlawful practices, prohibited practices, and uniform commercial codes. So I do think it's fairly important and something we could look at, and I'll agree to lay this over. So thank you for the suggestion, Representative Kelly.
Representative Krisha withdraws his amendment. Are you withdrawing both halves of the amendment, Representative Krisha, or did you want to do the second half?
I request to lay over the second amendment as well.
Okay, Representative Krisha requests to lay over the two amendments, or the single amendment that was previously divided. I don't know. There is another amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Franson moving to amend Senate File 778, the fifth engrossment as follows. The amendment is coded A78.
Representative Franson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, this is a fabulous amendment. I think this is certainly one that the body will adopt, because I think you'll all agree that this is about voting. And since voting is extremely important to everyone here, and certainly we don't want to disenfranchise any voters, which currently Senate File 778 does disenfranchise providers from voting, because if providers do not accept CCAP children, or they do not currently have CCAP children in their care, they are disenfranchised from participating in the union election. And I think we can agree that the last election, when there was voter ID on the ballot, we heard a lot of discussion that entire campaign season about disenfranchisement. And, I don't want to have to...
Representative Franson, we're on the A78 amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we are. And so, this amendment says that the Minnesota Licensed Family Child Care Association or similar trade or professional association may seek to be certified as exclusive representative under this section. And then also on page 6, line 23, insert AcroCare or other similar organizations may seek to be certified as the exclusive representative under this section. So basically then, our business owners can choose to decide who they want to represent them. Is it AFSCME? Is it SEIU? Is it Minnesota Licensed Family Child Care Association? Maybe it's the Chamber of Commerce. Maybe it's the National Federation of Independent Business Owners. Perhaps for the PCAs, it's AcroCare. And so since we like to vote, we want to give people the option. This is a really great amendment for us to vote yes on. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like a roll call on this amendment.
Roll call requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, nothing in this bill prohibits anybody from forming an organization to represent employees. The only thing in law that would prevent somebody, an organization, from doing that is if it's contradicted by having a government contractor type of status. So any organization, the two that are listed in the amendment, but there's nothing in the bill that specifies AFSCME, SEIU, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters, the electrical workers, any organization, or the Chamber of Commerce, or the Business Association. Nothing in this bill prohibits anybody from doing that. So this amendment's not necessary. If these two organizations choose to try and organize the daycare workers or the home care providers, the PCAs, they can do that. There's nothing in the bill that prevents it. So this is an unnecessary amendment, so please vote red.
Further discussion. Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Nelson, so if you would yield to a question, please.
He will yield. Representative Franzen.
Representative Nelson, are you saying that there is nowhere that says about AFSCME or SEIU in your bill?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No. If you read the bill, I mean, it's not a long bill. It's not like a couple of the other ones we've had earlier today that are hundreds of pages long. This is only 11 pages. There's nothing in the bill that mentions AFSCME, SEIU, or any other organization, and therefore does not restrict any organization that would choose to try and organize and represent these people.
Representative Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Nelson, if you would yield to another question, please.
He will yield. Representative Franzen.
Representative Nelson, I'm confused then. Could you please tell the body and to the public, and perhaps even to SEIU and AFSCME, why they are here today?
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe they're exercising their First Amendment rights to lobby the legislature for a bill that they support, allowing people to have the bargaining rights and to try and form a union, whether it's AFSCME, SEIU, or the United Brotherhood of Carpenters that would organize these people. They support the rights of these individuals, and that's why they're out there, because they believe in the bill and they support the bill.
Representative Drazkowski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Nelson yield for a question?
He'll yield. Representative Drazkowski.
Representative Nelson, you mentioned that you didn't think that it was necessary for Representative Franzen's amendment for the Minnesota Licensed Family Care Association to be able to be the exclusive representative. Have you read your bill on line 2.19? 2.19, it says that
The appropriate unit under this section shall be a statewide unit of family child care providers who meet the definition of section 179A.51 and who have had an active registration under chapter 119B within the previous 12 months. So, Representative Nelson, you being the tip of the union spear, you wrote a bill here that does the trick. It locks in only those organizations that have been registered under that chapter in the previous 12 months. So if the Minnesota Licensed Family Care Association has not been registered, which I would guess it probably has not been, there definitely is a need for this amendment in order to give them the opportunity to also be one of the exclusive representatives in this new union that is being acted on in the dark of night while Minnesota sleeps. Have you read that part of the bill, Representative Nelson?
Representative Nelson will yield. Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, Chapter 119B refers to child care providers. It does not deal with unions. It's people who are registered in as licensed or are legally unlicensed child care providers.
Representative Drewski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Nelson.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendments. The clerk will close the roll. There being 61 ayes and 69 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted.